Shifting gears a little bit now, I'm going to look at the supply side. This is the outlook and the current situation with respect to generating capacity in New York. And you can see from this that New York actually benefits from a very diverse fuel mix of generating resources. That's valuable for our system because we're not dependent on any one fuel type, and we've got a lot of tools in the toolbox, if you will, in order to meet the load. One of the things, though, if you look on the right side of this slide, is there's a significant geographic disparity in terms of how that generating capacity is spread across the state. When you look at the top circle, which is the upstate region within New York, there's a much greater fuel diversity, and it's a much cleaner mix than you see in the downstate region, which is dominated by fossil fuel and very little low-emission resources that are in the lower part of the state. To understand how this fleet capacity translates into actual production mix, it's important to understand some of the characteristics of some of these resources by generator type. This chart here shows you some of the capacity factors of the various types of generators, and this is reflecting how the capability at any one point in time translates into how much energy we can actually get out of these resource types through the course of the day. So when you look at resources like wind and solar, they are very, very attractive because they're clean and they have zero fuel costs, but there's only certain points of the day when we can actually rely on them to produce power. And compare that to nuclear, where it's available for almost 100% of the time, and it's very reliable. So we need to be able to, as we plan the system, understand how much we can rely on these various resource types. If you take a look at how the capacity factor translates into actual energy production, so this is the amount of energy that's actually used from day to day on the grid, this chart serves to highlight that disparity and that geographic disparity that you see, where upstate is very, there's a lot of zero emission resources that are available, and downstate is still heavily dependent on fossil fuels. This highlights the need for continued transmission investment in order to move the clean resources, which are predominantly located in the northern and western part of the state, to be able to move that to the load centers in the downstate region. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about some of the improvements, successes, and challenges that we see related to transmission and moving that power to the downstate region. Building off the discussion about capacity factor, thought it was useful this year to provide sort of a real-world example of how intermittent resources support serving the peak load, and some of the challenges we face and some of the opportunities that present themselves. The chart in this example, and it's outlined in significant detail within Power Trends, actually looks at our peak demand day, which from 2018, which was on August 29th. And you can see that we hit our peak in the evening 5 p.m. hour, 31,861 megawatts. If you look at the little pop-out chart, or the window that's in the middle of that, you can see how the wind production and the solar production contributed to serving that peak on that particular day. And it was a moderate wind day, 444 megawatts at the peak. But you can see that solar, which peaks in the middle part of the day, is already dropping off when you get to that 5 p.m. hour when demand is the highest. And in this particular example, wind, which was very, very plentiful early in the day, also dropped off in that afternoon part of the day. And a big part of that was because of curtailments that we needed to implement in order to recognize there was transmission constraints on the system that prohibited us from getting the wind out of the pockets where they're produced down to the load. In this particular example, it highlights some of the operational complexity that we see in operating a grid that has significant amounts of intermittent resources. And it also highlights the need for flexible generation in order to have assets and resources to be available when that period of peak demand coincides with a period of drop-off of the intermittence. One of the things I'm going to talk about is our understanding and our plans to really address some of the needs to make sure we've got appropriate pricing signals so that we can incentivize the types of generator behavior so that the resources are available to respond to these sort of conditions. This is another excellent example to show how storage and more storage assets on our grid will also significantly improve the ability to meet that peak load because batteries that are able to charge themselves in the early parts of the day when they're not as required would be available to offset some of the drop-off in production of the renewables. Switching gears yet again, want to make sure we maintain visibility and focus on one of the other core responsibilities, which is coming up with an efficient and economic production of wholesale energy. So we always keep our eyes on prices. And in this particular example, you can see energy prices up slightly in 2018 relative to 2017, largely reflective of a early part of the year where we had very, very cold weather that resulted in high prices. But by and large, over the last decade or so, energy prices have moderated. And you can see the impact and the correlation in this chart between energy prices and natural gas prices, reflecting that natural gas still is predominantly the marginal unit within New York.